Hi, welcome to another episode of Nudge Education Spotlight On. This is the first in a series of podcasts and webcasts that we are doing, looking at areas of education, areas of society, I guess, that haven't been explored in an accessible way to date. So the first series is on FASD, which is Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder. Get that right. And with me is Jessica Rutherford, who is a specialist in her research. She's doing a PhD. Her research is in FASD and children who have that. And also we have Claire Van Glyn from the real world, I guess, of parenting with children.
Not an academic background.
Yeah, I mean, you term yourself as an accidental expert because you have three children who have this condition that we're going to talk about. So this is the second in a series, so please look and find the other ones that you might come across. And today is all about, and you didn't want me to say myth busting, but I've said myth busting now. So what is it? What isn't it? We talked about what it was last week. What isn't it this week?
What isn't it? So these are. We've just put a list together really of things that come up again and again and again, things that I come across when I'm talking about my research, or things that I'm sure Claire comes across when talking about FASD. So we put this list together. The biggest one at the top of our list is that children with FASD are born to alcoholics. Mothers who are...
Because the titles would suggest something like that.
Yeah, and I think what we talk about all the time is we are determined. Our ultimate goal is to remove the stigma around FASD. So we will only talk about it with positivity and solution focused and the best option in a dilemma that we're faced with. And we want to talk about this because children aren't born to alcoholic parents by a long stretch of the imagination. It's going to happen if a biological mother is an alcoholic. Yes, it's going to happen, but that society kind of assume that is the only way it happens, and it doesn't. And what we talk about over and over again is, in the past, in years gone by, that's what we believed, that's what academics believed, but we know better, and this is what we want to refer to all the time. We just know a little bit better now, and it excites me because in 18 months' time, we're going to know a little bit better again, and in 5 years' time, we're going to know even better. So, we often refer to the seatbelt. 40 years ago, you didn't really have to wear a seatbelt in a car. Yeah. We now know better, and that's it. There's no judgment, no stigma. So I think this is something that we feel really passionate about. And that's why we don't really want to say this myth busting. There's such a lack of education around FASD, specifically for professionals. And definitely for medical professionals. So we want to be fair to them because a lot of them are dealing with the knowledge that they have now. And a lot of it hasn't filtered down. So the top one is that a baby will only be born to an alcoholic mother and go on to be diagnosed with FASD, and that's not the truth.
Yeah, because I guess the window of this actually happening in the period of pregnancy is quite small, isn't it, from what you were saying in terms of... Well, go on. Let's explore that, I guess.
Let's explore that. So with the physical features, the facial features, which is more commonly diagnosed as FAS, that's the diagnosis on the spectrum that is visible. You can see it. That is the window in pregnancy, week 6 to week 8, where that would happen. So if your fetus is exposed to alcohol between
it's about 11 days of that
really small window.
So it would be 40 weeks of gestation, that tiny window, and that's where the facial features can happen. And in the past, because we didn't know better, that was the only thing that was used for diagnosis. If those facial features weren't there, there was no diagnosis. No. So you can imagine the tiny percentage of children and young people with those facial features, because it happens during that time, that just shows you the tiny percentage who are diagnosed using that criteria.
Yeah, and I guess that shows, from what we discussed last week as well, is that the amount of parents or mothers who would still be unaware of pregnancy at that point.
Absolutely.
A glass of wine here, a glass of wine there could still lead to the same.
Absolutely,
Yes.
and that's why the removal of stigma and just that's why it needs to be gone, because about 50, I think it's conservatively about 50% of women don't actually know they're pregnant at that point, so that they are absolutely unaware, and that's why we need to not focus on any kind of blame, or it's something that can happen accidentally. Yeah, absolutely.
No. So alcohol exposure at any point during pregnancy can cause FASD, and it can be any amount as well. So that's where we step away from the mothers who are alcoholics to those that are enjoying more of a social drink, because it can be any amount, and we've got all these factors to consider as well. So the physical health of the mother, her just general nutrition, her mental health, whether she is using any other substances that come into play with the alcohol,
how her body metabolizes alcohol, because everyone knows people who can drink a lot more than other people and it doesn't have the same effect.
And that's the same ratio spectrum.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, because that's what's going to pass through the placenta. It's how that your how you process that as well. So that there are so many different factors, and I think because we're talking about what it's not, and I know that there's still advice given where when you're in your third trimester, certainly getting towards the end of it, you're okay. A lot of people still think there is an okay-ish point to have a few drinks, and there isn't. There just isn't. We don't know enough about what we do know is that we don't know there's a safe amount. So because we don't know that, we do know it's best to have nothing.
And I think as well, you're probably right about the generational thing, because my mother's not going to thank me for saying this, but like she gave up drinking during pregnancy with me, but she still smoked, because at the time it probably was still that was seen as a bigger thing, but actually,
And this is the thing, and it's just all about. This is why we have got to have no judgment, because everything evolves constantly, and we gain more and more knowledge, and we know better now than we did then. So we're left, we just deal with what we're facing with, but there are huge steps to be made, because I know we've said this in the last episode, but this is something that shocked me, that it is FASD is the Western world's #1 cause of learning disability, and it is 100% preventable. So that is something that is to be able to completely prevent a learning disability.
It's like a Bill Gates kind of initiative, isn't it? Malaria, next thing on the thing.
And it is. So and it's all down to education, all down to what we know, and where that some medical professionals may still be thinking, you're all right, I have a few glasses of wine in your third trimester. We just need to be like, actually, we really don't know that is safe, so let's be like, just let's abstain for the 9 months.
So I guess, this might be taking things slightly off track, but so we know that there's a very short window when the facial features, which is an indicator of the condition, might occur. So one of the things we talked about last week was about how difficult it is to diagnose, because to date it hasn't been labelled as such, and it would have been down to another spectrum disorder. It could be ADHD, or it could be this and that. So how is it that you can actually pinpoint and say, well, actually this is FASD, rather than or we not at that stage yet?
So many different factors. Well, no. So in January 2021, the very first NICE quality standards are going to be released for the first time ever.
National Institute of
Care Excellence.
Right.
So that kind of guides and governs the NHS and what they need to commission and what services need to put in place. So there is nothing at the minute that exists for FASD. So that's a huge problem. So imagine a world now where no service existed for autism. It's exactly the same, but it outnumbers autism.
And I guess we were at that point at one stage.
It's where we were 15 years ago.
Timeline you saw
so it's been recognised. Brilliant. This is the biggest leap that has been made, I would say, ever for in the world of FASD. that it's recognised, really robust, powerful quality standards are going to be issued in January, which means, because to be fair to medical professionals, there is so much uncertainty as who's meant to diagnose, how do I diagnose, what do I need to do it, and it's just a mixture, it's a postcode lottery, and we've talked about that before. It's just, and the professionals need some concrete guidance, and that's what they're about to get.
Because over the board, it's in place already, because you have,
and
experience.
so to create, we've used the Scottish Sign Guidelines to create the NICE quality standards, because you have a guideline first, and then those guidelines create a quality standard. And something that made me feel a lot of confidence in this procedure was they realised that the need was so great for something to be put in place that they did not have the time to create NICE guidelines, because they take about 4 years to create, 4 or 5 years. So they knew they could not wait. So to me, that is an acknowledgement of that this is something absolutely enormous in our society. We know it's there and we need to start tackling it. So they borrowed the Scottish Sign Guidelines and created quality standards from them. So to me, that was a huge deal to me that was done. Knowing that they just couldn't wait those extra years and then another year to create the quality standards.
Because I mean, figures-wise, around this table, in terms of children, you have 3 that have this condition. So I mean, but in terms of general population, what are we kind of looking at, I guess?
Well, I think we've talked about this quite a bit, haven't we? Where there's no, we need some real robust research done on figures and numbers. We can only take a guess. We know how much it outnumbers. We've got an idea of how much it outnumbers, say for example, autism. So like conservatively 5 to 1, conservatively, and this is what we touched on last time. There are so many children and young people misdiagnosed with autism, and that's not what it is. And again, that is all around a mixture of things. Professionals not feeling that they're equipped to diagnose PTSD, not knowing enough about it, but also a pressure of it's not a comfortable
conversation.
With
not a
I wonder how many actually get misdiagnosed because actually I don't know.
I think a lot. I think a lot.
It's easy, especially when you've got no clinical guidelines to say that it is.
Because you don't have the backup with those guidelines. It's sort of that framework.
Yes, I think and I think there was some. There was some. What was the percentage? We talked about it a little bit last week. Is it between 4 and the prevalence?
6 and 17% of the general population.
But we feel it's probably higher than that because it was such a tiny group of people that exercise was done on. So we feel it probably is.
It's the first indication of where we're at in the UK.
And I guess
in England. So
one last thing before I get you back on track with what we're talking about. It just simply came to me before, and it was can you do cross-cultural comparisons to say that countries that do not have high alcohol consumptions have a much lower incidence of FASD children being born? So in terms of, again, this might not be something for this particular discussion, but is it could you say, right, well, this culture doesn't drink alcohol, we can use this as a control to see if actually we're experiencing the same behaviours, we're saying the same things that we might not be attributing directly to
I think you probably could do that. We've talked about this before, haven't we? About in a lot of the Muslim countries where you wouldn't be drinking, but we know Australia, New Zealand, Canada,
South Africa.
There are really America. It's a huge global problem, absolutely huge. Canada is streets ahead of just kind of accepting it. It's there. Let's deal with it. Doing a lot of work on prevention. But I think the big piece of research about numbers just hasn't been done yet. And it's just waiting to be done. But I think we've talked about this before. I think you couldn't do something like that and not look at the cultures where there is no,
Yeah.
or not meant to be, or very, very minimal alcohol consumption. You'd be crazy not to.
Yeah,
look at
just
that,
out of interest.
yeah,
Anyway,
we talked. We know
How
it
do
is.
you
It's
get
really
back to
interesting.
It is, and that it does bring us back, because even within society, within the UK, there's further misunderstanding around what FASD, what it isn't, because when we come back to what we were saying about it being the children of alcoholics, there's also no type of alcohol. So you're not likely to do more damage with a cheap £7 bottle of vodka than a £120 bottle of wine.
okay. So it's, I mean,
Alcohol is
it could be
alcohol.
grape fluid, or it could be,
Yeah.
Krug champagne. You're still going to have the same.
It's still alcohol.
And I think that leads a little bit to a little bit of a misconception around the type of mother this can happen to.
Yeah, because I guess, you're thinking from a stereotypical point of view, somebody who's going to be an alcohol abuser, somebody who's drinking heavy alcohol rather than beers and wines.
Who would struggle to afford it and so would be buying cheap alcohol. But there are children born with FASD to degree educated mothers who have
Highly professional.
Yeah, and it's just and like I've said this before, there isn't a mother on this planet who sets out to do that, but circumstances sometimes mean that it happens. It accidentally happens, and it's so unfair to that child and that family to live. I lived with FASD with 3 children for nearly a decade, and I did not know that that's what I was living with and that's what I was dealing with, and the damage that has been caused to my children's mental health is immeasurable.
Yeah.
So that's what we want to prevent. We want to prevent that from happening, because living with it every day, you become. We were talking earlier about. I've said that I would probably need somebody to follow me around for a full 24-hour period.
Yeah.
To then say, why have you just done that? What are you doing there? Because I don't even think I could document every intervention I do on a minute-by-minute basis. It's just how I have evolved as a mother, and it's how I keep things safe and keep my children as regulated as I possibly can. So I think we need to. There are so many families who don't know, and then this is what puts the strain on our system, on our NHS, on our mental health system. And actually, we do know that early diagnosis, as early as possible, no stigma, no judgment, this is just what it is, this is what's happened, will lead to much, much better life outcomes. And we just know that. Common sense tells you it, but I see that with the families that I work with, I see that day in, day out, and I find myself longing and thinking, where my children would be now if I had a diagnosis at the right time.
And I guess this is what the thing we just talked before we started recording is that Jessica's kind of trailblazing really with your research, because a lot of it's being based on peer-related reviews. I guess there's not a lot of research that's being done on actual families or children that have this or live with this condition. In terms of
Totally. Because when I started my PhD journey up, I'd spent 2 years reading everything I could possibly read and teaching myself the neuroscience of this and the medical, and just like really, really getting into it. But I'd never met anybody.
Yeah.
So I was really struggling to put that together and thinking like, well, if I was to spend an hour with a child with this condition, how could I transfer my academic knowledge to what was happening in front of me, or the interactions and things. So when I went away, and I've been working with this residential summer camp for kids, specifically for kids with FASD. When I first went to camp, I kind of held back and I watched everybody else like greeting the families, greeting the kids, and I was just observing, like, okay, I've got this. And the next car that came in, I approached them to greet them as somebody else had come around the other side of the car to do the same thing. And this child was extremely dysregulated. There was a bit of a scene, which I won't get into, but I just stood there and froze, and I thought,
I've not been prepared for this through all the
I haven't got the faintest idea what I'm doing. And all the academic knowledge, all the papers and everything
Yeah.
that I'd read, all the journals, all the science from all these world-leading experts just left my brain.
Yeah.
And I was like, right now, data on the significance and the impact of frontal lobe deficits is no use
How
to
do I
me.
make this
How do I
situation
get
not
this child
dangerous?
out of the tree, or how do I stop them doing this?
Yeah. Or out
yeah.
in the middle of a roundabout with 6 lanes of traffic coming off it. Like that.
Because our nudge, I say ours, nudge education's relationship with Claire started because we started working with one and then two of your children.
And one of the first things I said to you was, you have been dealing with kids with FASD
Yeah.
since you started,
Yeah.
and they probably have no clue, you have no clue, and they'll be misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all, and this, and it's huge. And as I started talking about it, you could see the penny drop with you. And you're like, you were starting to think about kids who you
Yeah, we see it,
with.
and we see, and especially, it's no commentary on the system, but there is a delay in getting diagnoses for children, and it can be long and painful for parents and children alike. So sometimes, the easiest option is sometimes the one that they go with. And as you said, it's not something that lives in isolation, is it? You could have FASD and something
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
and quite often you do. And I think that we've talked about this a lot. There is a huge crossover with ADHD and ASD.
Comorbidity, that's the
OCD,
word.
yeah,
that I was looking for,
comorbidity,
yeah.
yeah. And there are absolutely tons.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest problems is when the misdiagnosis happens, and it's specifically for me ADHD, and a child is then medicated for ADHD when it's FASD, the chances of that medication working in the way that it's meant to work is pretty slim. And so you've got children medicated for something they shouldn't be medicated for, and I think that's a huge problem. And I know one of the frustrating things about FASD is there is no black and white, one road of this is your treatment pathway, this is what we need to do.
That's one of the things I was going to ask. Is that one thing we can look at? Is there a clinical medication that will make this better?
No. And that's because it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
It is just you couldn't measure all of the different. So is it over